I think we'll get started and people can kind of trickle in as we go. Uh, Good morning, everybody, and thank you for coming. I'm very excited for this workshop. This is something I've been looking forward to for a while. I'm excited about uh, this kind of research because I feel like it hits so many spots. It's research, right? It's publishable, it's fundable, and we'll talk about that. But it's also very pedagogically oriented, right? So it's immediately practical. It helps students immediately, and it's faculty development all at the same time, right? I think we can all uh, probably speak to experiences of where we engaged in research and how much we got out of doing the research, right? That improved us as faculty. Uh, so I'm just very excited for this workshop. I'm gonna share my screen and there we go. Uh, yeah, so the workshop is teacher research, how to make classroom inquiry more systematic and who can fund it. Thank you to Office of Academic Research for sponsoring it and making it part of some of their certifications. I'm Tom Gershon. I'm the Writing Intensive Program Coordinator and also faculty in the English department. Uh, and you know, I'll say, well, I may as well go to that slide. So this is the overview for the presentation. And so some of it is definitely going to be uh, PowerPointy, right? Because I want to kind of just give a background of what teacher research is and give an example of some teacher research. But I hope to spend, as you can see, that the last 35 minutes or so are discussion, questions, brainstorming, workshopping. So I hope for this to be a highly interactive workshop and for it to have some really practical impacts, right? So by the end of this workshop, I'm hoping that we'll at least have some conversations going that maybe we can build on. And I would love to see, a project or two come out of this. Uh, I'll also say, that I've I've done some teacher research. My field, writing studies, is very pedagogically oriented. Uh, Much of the research, most of the research in writing studies is teacher research. It's pedagogically oriented. But I, am by no means the expert in the kind of research, the kind of qualitative, quantitative research that's mostly associated with the social sciences. That is really, as far as the research methods go, it's the social sciences that are kind of the foundation for teacher research. And I know we have social scientists here, and so you know I would love to hear your input and really tap into your expertise. Part of the One of the things that I find most exciting about teacher research is that it's highly interdisciplinary and collaborative. So, this is where we can kind of come together and have these conversations and really help one another and draw on one another. So I'm excited for that aspect of it. But we'll start off with just a brief overview of the workshop. We'll talk a little bit about what is teacher research. I'll also suggest some of the differences from assessment or simply being a reflective teacher. Then I'll break down the steps or some common steps of teacher research. Provide a little bit of an extended example of a published teacher research study. And then, like I said, we'll finish off with that sort of brainstorming, workshopping, questions and wrap up aspect of it. So any questions about anything before we get started? Any issues, difficulties? All right, I'm on share screen mode. So if you're raising your hand, I may not see you. So just if you do have a question, just go ahead and unmute and go ahead and ask. And that's true of the workshop as a whole. At any point, feel free to unmute yourself, interrupt, and share or ask any questions or suggestions or comments that you have. So the text that I'm working from, and our guiding text for the workshop is Action Research in Teaching and Learning, a practical guide to conducting pedagogical research in universities by Lynn Norton. Lynn Norton is a psychology professor in the UK. There's quite a bit of action research and pedagogy research, teaching research coming out of the UK, and this is an excellent text. I do believe it's available digitally through our library, but if I'm wrong about that, reach out to me and I can help you. I have a digital copy, so I can share whatever is legally allowed for me to share from that digital copy. So just send me an email. So what is teacher research? Some of the questions, so I have these questions up on the slide. I'm sure we've all had questions like these, similar to these, as teachers, right? Why are students not attending my lectures? Why don't students appear to be reading, right? Every day, every time we teach a class, one of the things that makes teaching interesting is that we're always facing new challenges, right? And trying to respond productively to those challenges, and thinking of ways that we can improve our teaching and improve our students' learning. Teacher research is simply taking the questions that we have every day from our teaching and formalizing them, right? Making that inquiry a little more systematic, so that we can do more than so that we can get better feedback on it, basically, right? So that when we make changes to our teaching, we can go beyond, oh, my students seem to like that, right? Or that seemed to work, right? And we can have some evidence for our practice as educators. I'll say one of the types of questions that's not on here, but I think is, and it's telling that it's not on here. I got these questions from the book on the previous slide. There's not any demographic questions on here, right? How do students from different backgrounds do or respond to different types of teaching interventions? CSUSB is really a perfect place to ask those kinds of questions, right? And there's really not nearly enough of those kinds of questions being asked in teacher research. So teacher research is a type of action research. It's obviously related to teaching. Action research is simply research that has an immediate practical impact, right? It's research that seeks to make a change, cultural change, community change, research that has an immediate and practical or pragmatic impact, right? It's not sort of purely theoretical or anything like that. And teacher research is a specialized type of action research that's related to teaching. It's reflective, meaning that you're really, the practitioner is looking at themselves, right? Is really considering themselves and their own actions and their own approach to teaching. It's change-oriented, as I just mentioned, like all action research is. And again, it's collaborative and interdisciplinary, which is one of the things that I find particularly interesting about it. I also think one of the things that makes teacher research such a great thing here at CSUSB is we're a teaching university, right? So we do research, we do great research. We also do a lot of teaching, and we're highly committed to teaching. And so teacher research at a place like CSUSB really makes sense because it allows us to emphasize our strengths in teaching, and also have some of our work kind of do double duty, right? Where we can do research and develop as teachers and help our students and publish and get funding and kind of do all of those things all at once. So it makes a lot of sense here at CSUSB. So how does teacher research differ from assessment or just being a reflective practitioner? The two big things are that it's meant to be published and it's fundable. There are a lot of journals, conferences related to teaching and the practice of teaching. There are journals specific to different fields, right? Each discipline or most disciplines, I would say, have journals that are related to teaching in that discipline, or even journals that maybe aren't focused on that, but still welcome pedagogical research in that discipline. There's also lots of teaching and learning conferences and conferences in different disciplines, again, that welcome this sort of research. But even if you're doing other sorts of public conversation around it, right? If you're posting to blogs or leading workshops based on your findings, or even presenting at department meetings, right? The idea is that the research is going public to modify practice, right? It's trying to make that impact. So I'll mention a couple of journals toward the end that publish teacher research, and I'll also have a list of foundations that can fund teacher research. So the steps of teacher research: 1, identifying a problem or a paradox, an issue, a difficulty. Something that arises out of your everyday teaching, right? Thinking of ways to tackle the problem, right? What are some possible ways we could respond to that issue or address that issue? What are some interventions we can make? 3, doing it, performing those interventions, responding to the problem. And the first 3 steps are really part of just teaching, right? We're always doing that, right? We're always identifying issues or difficulties or problems, or they're presenting themselves to us, and we're thinking of ways to respond, and then we implement them. It's steps 4 and 5 that really distinguish teacher research, right? You're going to actually gather that data, right, and evaluate it, and then 5, modifying future practice. So I'm going to go now into the example, but before I do, does anybody have any questions so far? And again, I can only see a handful of people on the screen at a time, so if you have a question, go ahead and just unmute yourself.
I have a question.
Yes, Gemma.
I just want to clarify that when you list the possible research questions for this type of teacher research, you pinpoint that no demographic questions, like no demographic information are included.
Yeah.
So the reason, because it's IRB process, because I'm considered about IRB process, this kind of a project. And if we are using your own student for data set, are you allowed to actually investigate some demographic information?
Yeah, I think
yeah, that's my question.
Would be, yeah, that would be just as you say, Gemma. That would be a question for IRB, right? So you would definitely go through the IRB process on any kind of project like this, and they would, and even before, right, before you even start the project, it's great just to contact IRB, as you know, and get some suggestions from them on what's going to be practical in that project, right? What's possible, what's not. I think you can at some level, right, you should always be able to get some demographic information, right? If you can't, if IRB says, well, we really don't want demographic information for the course, depending on, it could be a small course, right? And there could be issues there. Well, maybe for the major, right? And if not the major, maybe the school and the university. But so at some level, right, you could maybe make some of those connections to demographics, right? Because I think disaggregating for demographics is just so key. It's very important, right? If we're interested as we are in addressing the achievement gap, right? And in better serving our first generation students and our students of color, I think we need to have that data, right? So I think you could work with IRB to come up with a plan that'll work. But I would suggest that to at least try to go in that direction.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anyone else?
I just wanted to make a point regarding the questions that you put up. They're very good questions. They're broad questions, but one could also ask some very more specific, narrow questions relate to a specific teaching strategy or a special way in which students are grouped, or maybe of a special kind of assessment, comparison of assessments and things like that. So even though these are excellent questions, I think they shouldn't be limited to broader kinds of questions. They could be much more narrower, specific teaching strategies or assessment strategies.
Yeah, I agree completely, right? I mean, one of the things that we talk about a lot in writing studies and in the writing intensive program as well, writing can facilitate a particular type of student learning, right? So a question about, how do students, can we measure impacts of using writing to learn in a class versus not using writing to learn, or writing assessments versus multiple choice assessments? There's all kinds of possibilities there. So yeah, thank you.
Absolutely.
Kenneth.
Hey, I'll follow up with Joseph for a minute. So just the first question, why are students not attending my lecture? That could be one of the first things, whether that be the teaching or otherwise. Is it the time? Is it the place? Is it and so you can actually ask that specific question in a drop-down window, and that will give you a lot more information than just a general question.
Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, and even there, even is it me or is it them, right? Is it, in other words, is it something going on with the students that they're not attending my lectures, right? Is it time conflicts or lack of preparation or something like that? Or is it something about my lecture style or something I'm doing in the lectures, right? So you can, and depending on what your assumptions are, you would design a different type of study to get
to follow up with that for a minute. Why don't students appear to be reading? That's a deep, heavy question. It's in the university, you should expect that you should be reading at least 20 books in one class. And if the student isn't reading, what is the problem with that? Is that because they don't have the skill set to do scanning and to take notes? What can you do to help the student out? Because it's not just about why don't students appear to be reading, but you need my background is in special ed. That would lead me to ask some serious questions and have to do some assessments to find out why the student, I wouldn't mitigate my requirements to make that happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. All right, so here's an example, and we can continue to hopefully this will also enrich our discussion too. So here's a kind of a generic example, and then I'm going to follow it up with a published example. So the issue that in this generic hypothetical example is third-year psychology students are using too few up-to-date journal articles in their written projects, right? So that's step one, identifying the issue. Step two, thinking of ways to tackle the problem, right? If we believe the issue or the problem somehow lies within the students, right? In other words, or within the relationship of the students to the course material, we could interview the students, we could survey the students, right? If we believe that the issue or the problem lies with our approach to teaching, right, we could design some kind of other study, some sort of experimental study, right, to address that. But let's say in this case, we think, we'd really like to get more information about the students and about their practices, right? So we decide we want to do an interview, right? So we're going to interview our students. And that brings up, its own questions, right? What kind of interview? Which students should we interview? How many students, right? Once we've completed the interview, or the interviews, I should say, we want to evaluate it, right? And so for that, we, of course, are going to need to record and transcribe interview data. I should say, back to Gemma's point here, is before any of this, right, we should be having conversations with and then proposing the study to the IRB board, right? But I'm just focusing, so that's the sort of institutional context for that, but I'm just focusing on the steps of the research itself here. So, and then we're going to want to analyze that data for themes or patterns, construct categories, and then code data in the transcripts according to those categories. To modify future practice, well, that's going to depend on what we find, right? That's the whole point of doing the study. So if we find that, students say they really struggle with narrowing down database results, for example, you could focus on that in class, right? You could bring a librarian, ask a librarian to come into class and lead a workshop or a series of workshops on library database searches. You could also, depending on the results that you get, you could present the results. I did this series of interviews. These are the patterns I found, and bring that research into class, right? And have a discussion based on the research, based on the findings. So to go a little bit deeper, this is from Norton et al. 2004, and it's very parallel to the issue that we just saw. In this case, and this was a published study, third-year psychology students were using too few up-to-date journal articles in their essays. So thinking of ways to tackle it, an experimental study, right? This professor ended up doing an experimental study rather than a survey or interviews. The issues, an experimental study is where you make some sort of intervention, right? You make some sort of change that you hypothesize will have an impact on the issue, and then you test that intervention to see if it had the desired impact. Some concerns there are, well, it may not account for the messiness of real teaching. So for example, if you decide that what you want to do is have an intervention, but you don't, because of the second issue, the ethical issue, you don't want to have a control group, right? Or you need to have a control group, but you don't want it to impact their grade, right? You can create a sort of completely hypothetical situation. You could tell the students this isn't graded, right? And you can kind of have that kind of more controlled environment for the study. But that's going to affect things like motivation. That's going to affect things. It doesn't account for the kind of the messiness of real teaching. The flip side of that is, as I mentioned, well, if you have a control group, are they going to be put at a disadvantage, right? So how can we design a study that doesn't necessarily disadvantage any control group that you have? In this particular case, the answer was collaboration. So as I mentioned, she is a psychology professor. She designed an intervention for her class that she was going to present to the entire class, but she was going to compare it with 2 other courses in psychology that assigned similar projects, but did not have anything parallel to her intervention. And she was going to be able to use that to compare her results, as well as previous classes of hers where she did not have the intervention. So the hypothesis here is, one possibility is our students were not up to date with how to search for journal articles. And so she spent a 1-hour class session introducing students to how to find relevant journals in print and electronically using library databases. And again, these are 3rd-year psychology students, so presumably this is not their introduction to searching for journals, right? They presumably would have had some instruction in this already in other courses, but this is more specific to the context of that class. Right? And then hypothesis 2, students know how to find relevant articles, but have trouble knowing how to use the information in that article to weave into an essay. And so for this, she designed the intervention that she made a change in the assignment from the evaluation of 3 articles, as it used to be, to a detailed analysis of a single recent less than 5-year-old article, and also provided detailed written feedback related to the final written project. So after implementing those interventions, she then analyzed their final written projects for the number of unique journal citations, right? So not 10 citations. If there were 10 citations from the same journal article, that counted as 1, right? And she then categorized those further into journal articles that were under 5 years old and 2 journal articles that were more than 5 years old. And as I said, she compared these results with other psych classes in the study and prior years of her course, of the same course that she was teaching. Based on these results, and she found a number of things. She found that students in her class, the class that received intervention, did indeed use a statistically significant increase. There was a statistically significant increase in the number of newer journal articles that the students used. And so that was positive data. At the same time, remembering that the feedback that she provided on the student papers is also a kind of data. She went back and reviewed the kind of feedback she was giving to the student papers and saw that, yes, they were using more journal articles, but she found that maybe the number of journal articles wasn't the best measure of what she was trying to help her students accomplish, right? And what she was really, in retrospect, going for is how to help students better integrate their sources as part of a contribution to an ongoing scholarly conversation. And so it was that combination, it was having multiple sources of data, right, that allowed her to better refine the problem. And she could design a future study that could help her get at that new issue, right, the better refined issue. Okay, so any questions? We're about in our halfway point and done with the sort of PowerPoint part of the presentation. Any questions or comments about anything I brought up so far? before we go to the more brainstormy part of it. Yeah, Gemma.
For the intervention design, to get published in a peer review journal, the reviewers might question about the internal validity for the intervention design. So I'm just wondering how, I don't know, from the special education field, I'm from like intervention, experimental design, research type, and I see teacher research, it's really good, especially for CSCSB, setting. But still, it bothers me how I can control all the external factors to make sure that the changes I see as actually contribute to my, manipulating the intervention or strategies.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my question. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think were I wanting to do a study like this, I would reach out to somebody like you, Gemma, and have that conversation with you and try to brainstorm some ways of accounting for those messy variables that maybe making the data less valid, right? That's one of the assumptions of teacher research is that you can is that by making it more interdisciplinary and more collaborative, you can avoid some of those pitfalls. But I think because it's practitioner research, right, it's always going to be a little more messy than these highly controlled types of experiments that you can do, in sort of in pure sciences or whatever. So, there's always going to be that messiness. And I think different disciplines and different journals have different standards and different understandings of that messiness and more or less tolerance for that kind of messiness. So I think there are ways of designing a study, I guess in short, of ways of designing the kind of study that even with the messiness, right, even we won't be able to isolate maybe cause and effect 100%, right? But we can talk in terms of relative probability, right? That it's reasonable, right? So the standards are not what they might be in a completely positivist experimental paradigm, right? Where we assume neutrality and we're looking for 100% cause of effect. The standards are going to be, would it be reasonable to accept these conclusions based on the data?
And the other point is that, the research design should follow the research question and not the other way around. So the way we design our research should be such that it answers the question that we are asking, and then addresses the kinds of issues that Gemma is talking about, internal validity and other kinds of issues that make the result.
Hello, and thank you for calling Caltrans
more valid. I think Thomas's analysis is very good.
Turn the call as soon as possible.
Thank you, Joseph. Kenneth, would you mind muting yourself? I can hear the. I don't know if you can hear me, Kenneth. Maybe I can do that. Oh, there we go. Thanks, Kenneth. Yes, thank you. Thank you. Any other questions, concerns, issues, points? And I'll say in chat, Benjamin makes a really, I think, useful comment as well. Kind of parallel to what you were saying too, Joseph.
Yeah, I mean, the generalizability of any result is, always to be done with great introspection. Can't just generalize to everything that falls under the sun.
Yeah. Okay, so we have about 25 minutes left. What I'd like you to do is I'm going to give you about 2 minutes or so to write down, to just brainstorm individually any questions, right? These could be questions that you are struggling with in your current classes, or recurring issues that have come up in your as you teach. They could be questions that narrow down, as I believe Kenneth mentioned, narrowing down some of these questions, or questions that are not on here but you think should be, right? Any kinds of questions, any kinds of questions, issues, problems, to borrow from Stuart Firestein, any kind of ignorances that you would like to pursue. And just if you can get 1, 2, 3 in the next couple of minutes, that would work.
Hi, this is Ben Becerra. I just had a question in terms of, again, going back to the research that might be a type of intervention. I haven't quite done that yet. I'm a little interested in it, but I could see how some of the issues with balancing the ethical part, maybe even more than the ethical part, is having students getting mad to realize they were an experiment and then taking that out on my SOTs. So I'm wondering, is there a way to still do an intervention and let the students be aware of it? But like, what are some of the soft skills involved in that to kind of make them more of a part of it versus thinking they're an experiment?
Yeah, that's a great question, Benjamin. Thank you. I'll give you sort of my response, but then I would love to hear from others that I think are probably more experienced in doing this kind of research. My response is there are research designs, experimental research designs, that allow you to actually give every student in the class the same intervention. So a pre-post test kind of thing, right? Where you sort of in one semester give every student in the class one intervention. The next semester, give every student in the class a different intervention, and then you can compare the results that way. Of course, you know, it's slightly different populations maybe, and you'd have to account for that kind of stuff. So it's not without its limitations, but that is one possibility. There are, if you're genuinely unsure about whether intervention X or intervention Y is going to be more appropriate and have better results, then I also don't think and the scholarship suggests that there isn't anything unethical about giving half the class one intervention and half the class the other intervention. Again, making sure that you're designing the groups so that they're representative, right? So that you're accounting for other variables as much as you can. And then comparing those results without a control group, right? So that there are ways of doing it. Again, there are limitations and there are messinesses there, but you know, it's all about kind of finding that balance in the particular situation. But again, I would love to hear from anybody else how you might address something like that.
I think Benjamin's issue is very valid in that, you know, you always worry about how much the participants know about the intervention, but that really points to the internal validity of the results. You're going to affect the internal validity in that way if they know that, because they're going to either perform better just because they know they are in an intervention type of study, or they may resist it. So, we don't know in what direction they're going to go. They're not going to act the same way anymore once they know that they are in a research study.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I'm trying to think. There was a recent study that looked at using rubrics, how effective giving students the rubric for a writing project is when it comes to their ability to reflect on their own writing processes, but also in improving their written results. And that one it had 3 groups, and it had a control group and 2 other groups that used a rubric. They used 2 different types of rubric, one more detailed than the other. I have to go back and see how they handled that issue, Ben, of to what extent. I don't believe they were that they informed the students necessarily which group they were in, and whether they were in a control group or whether they were in intervention X or intervention Y. But yeah, that's just an example that I'm thinking about here.
I mean,
sorry, go ahead, Kim. Go ahead, Kim. Gemma, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I just want to share my own project I did one time. So I found the issue while I'm teaching. So what I did, I just write a IRB report, and I'm gonna use the study design pre and post. So the class I'm having problem with the control group, and then next that kind of quarter, the next quarter will be my intervention group, and then I was approved that even though the population is different, students are different, and there will be some bias for instructor because I know I'm going to change a little bit. So I'm not sure if the independent variable is the only variable, because I'm going to change everything, not just that variable, but course material might be. So again, it bothers me as a researcher, since you cannot control everything. But in terms of ethical issue, I think using like pre as your current class, as your pre condition, and then your next class will be your intervention group. And for that IRB, I don't have to disclose any information to my students because it was a part of learning activities. And students are not going to grade based on specific condition because it's already embedded. That's one thing you can do, in terms of getting IRB and not interrupting students' involvement and anything else. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great example. Thank you, Gemma. So again, like Gemma pointed out, there's going to be some limitations. There's going to be some messiness there, but you can still get some useful results there also.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So I'm hoping that at this point you all had a chance to come up with a question or 2 or 3. And so I'm going to go ahead and just pair you up automatically here. And what I'd like you to do in the breakout rooms, I'll just give you a couple minutes, is just share your questions. I'll actually give you a little more than a couple minutes. I'll give you about maybe not quite 10 minutes, because I'd really love the opportunity for maybe some conversation about collaboration, about how things could go forward. And like I said, I think it'd be so cool if maybe a research project or 2 came out of this. So let's see here. I'm going to create a breakout room for everybody and put you in there. All right, well, everybody stayed to the breakout room to the very last second, which I love. That's great. That makes me think that there were lots of great conversations going on. So what I'm going to do is I just have a couple more slides. I want to talk about the journals where you could publish and the organizations where you could fund it. And then we'll be very close to out of time, but I'm happy to stay on for anybody who can and wants to, if we could continue some of these conversations. But also, you know, I hope if you haven't already to exchange contact info with the people in your group, the other person in your group, or anybody else in the larger session if you want to continue some of this. So let me go back to that little PowerPoint. So, all right, so some journals that publish teacher research, there are going to be more. Some of the ones in my field in writing studies, research in the teaching of English, that's from the National Council of Teachers of English. Conference on college, it's now just CCC, but it's the journal of the conference on college composition and communication, also NCTE, assessing writing. There are others depending on, you know, anything from course designs to more rigorous experimental studies. There's room for all of that if it has to do with writing in the field. So I would love to work with, if you're interested in writing, I would love to work with you on designing something there. As I mentioned before, there are pedagogy journals in particular disciplines. And then the big one, the journal, this is the Taylor and Francis peer-reviewed journal, Educational Action Research. This is the journal, this journal publishes, as the title implies, educational action research in all disciplines. So that's another possibility to check out. These are some programs and foundations that could fund teacher research, and depending on the type of grant, the type of research that you're doing, you know, you'll find different variable amounts of funding and you know, different requirements for funding. But if you want to take a screenshot of this for your records, or you know, to hang on to, you're welcome to. Otherwise, this is being recorded, and of course, I'm happy to email it to anybody, the entire PowerPoint or just this slide.
That'll be great.
Okay, I'll do that.
Yeah, the last two slides, Tom. Sorry, the last two slides, Tom, were great. Thank you. If you could share those.
Absolutely, yeah, I'll do that. I can just email the whole thing to the group. We have, technically we're out of time, but you know, if anybody can think of some next steps to kind of keep this going, whether that's starting a project or starting a email list, a group on campus to just exchange this kind of information or to have these kinds of conversations, you know, email me and I would love to get something like that going. Also, like I said, I'm happy to stay on. I don't have anything right now, so if you can stay on and you want to chat further, I'm happy to do that. Otherwise, thank you all so much for participating, and I look forward to talking with you more.
Thomas, thank you for putting this up. It's great. Appreciate the time and effort you've put into this.
Absolutely. Thank you.